We just finished up a discussion on some of our basic reference types. Before we move on, I want to mention a quick gotcha around fixed arrays and dynamic arrays. Before I tell you exactly what this gotcha is, I want to do a quick vocabulary review. So here's our vocabulary review of some basic programming lingo. Here's a snippet of JavaScript code on the screen. Notice how we have an array with some number of arrays inside of it. We would refer to these as nested arrays, right? You could refer to this as a nested array. You could refer to the entire structure right here as a two-dimensional array. So again, I just want to do a quick vocabulary review because if you don't remember that terminology, what I'm about to tell you won't make a lot of sense. All right, now that we remember what a nested dynamic array is, or just what a nested array is, I want to show you a quick diagram that's going to explain part one of a two-part gotcha. Yes, this is a two-part gotcha. So here's part one. Part one is that in the Solidity world, in other words, with the Solidity programming language, there is no issue whatsoever with making a nested dynamic array. In other words, a data structure that looks exactly like this right here. So in the Solidity language, this is not a problem. We 100% can build a data structure like this. However, remember that we are not working with Solidity alone. Eventually, we want to pull data out of our contract into the JavaScript world so that we can show some data on the screen inside of a web browser or an app or whatever it might be. So the issue here is that we do not yet have the ability to pull a nested dynamic array from the Solidity world over to the JavaScript world. So in the JavaScript world, nope, we can't communicate with Solidity. We cannot receive a nested dynamic array. Now that might seem very surprising because as you and I very well know, in JavaScript, yep, we absolutely can print this out. This is not an issue. We have a nested array right here, not an issue. So to be clear, this is not a limitation of JavaScript. It's not a limitation of Solidity. It's a limitation of the bridge between the two languages. That's the limitation. The communication layer, the translation layer between the two, that is where this restriction is coming from. We cannot communicate nested dynamic arrays. Now that might not sound like a big issue. You might be thinking, Steven, you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't often make arrays of numbers like this. Okay, I believe that. That's fair. However, I do want to mention part two of this gotcha. So remember, I said it was two parts. Here's part two. Before I tell you exactly what part two is, I want to do one other quick piece of review. So back over here, this is a chart of all of our basic types. We looked at this just a couple videos ago. You will recall that one of our basic types was a string. That was a sequence of characters, and we're probably very used to strings. They represent words, sentences, whatever. Unfortunately, strings inside of Solidity are represented as dynamic arrays. So even though it looks like to you and me, this is a string right here, Solidity stores this and works with it as though it were a dynamic array. So what happens when you put those two facts together? The fact that strings are strings are dynamic arrays, and the fact that we cannot transfer nested dynamic arrays over to the JavaScript world. When you put those two together, it means that we cannot transfer arrays of strings over to JavaScript. We have no problem whatsoever storing arrays of strings inside of Solidity, but we are not actually able to move an array of strings over to the JavaScript world. There are, of course, somewhat easy ways to get around this. However, I thought it would be really handy if I just mentioned this to you right now, because I find it rather likely that at some point in time, you're going to want to make an array of strings. Right? I think that it's completely reasonable to expect to do something like const colors is red, green, blue, right? This looks like a simple thing right here. Well, unfortunately, we can't really design our contracts with this kind of data structure in mind just yet. Now, to prove this to you, I put together a tiny little contract inside of another Remix tab. So here's a contract called test. I've created an array of strings right here, and I called it my array. Inside of this constructor function, I pushed a new string into my array. And then finally, I created a getArray function that attempts to return the entire array. Now you'll notice that all the code right here looks to be, more or less okay. Maybe since we don't know that much about Solidity yet, maybe we can't really say that it's perfect, but certainly you'll notice that there doesn't appear to be any notification inside the code editor that says that we made a typo or anything like that. However, if I pull open the right-hand tab over here, you'll see a message that says specifically unimplemented feature error. Nested dynamic arrays are not implemented here. And so what this error message literally means is, okay, what you did is totally fine, but we being Remix, does not have the ability to work or receive with nested dynamic arrays yet. So it's not an issue with Solidity. It is not necessarily an issue with JavaScript. It is an issue with communication between the two. So that's our first really big gotcha, I think, around Solidity. Again, this might seem like a very surprising thing, but hey, this is all a work in progress. Hopefully at some point in time, this will be resolved. There are already efforts and issues raised to fix this. However, at this point in time, we just don't have support for it just yet. All right, so now that we got that big gotcha out of the way, let's continue in the next video, and we're going to start working on our next variable, which was somewhere around here. Where is it? Right here, our list of players. So quick break, and we'll take care of that in the next video.